And welcome for the last section of Unity of Command to Dawn 42 DLC. Today we're going to cover the 4 missions of Conference 4, which really gets the player into the alternative history zone, with Star, Gallop, and Krasnodar giving you these very far-reaching ahistoric objectives, and Dnieper going all speculative with what if you kick Manstein's butt a year early. It's still very much in the vein of the rest of the campaign as you get to gallop through steppes in the snow, and I found the difficulty to be pretty reasonable across the board, with Dnieper functioning as this final tally for how well you did during the campaign. And speaking of difficulty, I've started a new playthrough of the campaign after the release of the DLC because there were some updates, and I'm really happy to say that with a few tweaks it's got, Raised Rostov is no longer officially Godzilla difficulty. That title is still exclusive to the Edelweiss mission of the Stalingrad campaign, and I played it recently. It's still that hard. Moreover, the supply difficulties in Raised Rostov and a little bit of nudging from some people have led me to appreciate the supply dump ability a little bit more than I used to. It gives a unit reserve supply for one turn, just like oversupply, but unlike oversupply, it goes away as soon as the unit moves. So the optimum use case for this ability is when your HQ has long range, you have a bunch of units that have moved far forward and far beyond your supply range, and at the end of the turn, you give these guys supply dumps so that they're fully supplied at the beginning of the next turn. Raised Rostov, with its supply dead zone around the city, is where this ability really shines. And dropping a bunch of supply dumps on the guys that have just crossed the Don is a real game changer, and will make the mission so much easier. Especially since it's not so difficult to upgrade the Stalingrad front HQ, and then just start handing out one command point supply dumps all over the place. And speaking of updates in the campaign, Kotelnikovo has got a little bit of a nerf, with a Romanian unit holding Zhutovo on turn 1, which really doesn't change the strategy for this mission, as instead you'll have to build a pontoon bridge east of Aksai Crossing, attack Zhutovo from 2 sides, kick the Romanians out, and once again block the German tank, and eventually destroy the tank and take the crossing, and the rest of the mission is just the same. And now that I mentioned pontoon bridges, don't forget to give Southwest Front that ability. It's critical at Gallop, and if you somehow forget to give it to Southwest Front, just like I did, you might have to restart the entire campaign. Just like I had to. Anyway, before we do the doodles, let me just say a few words about this campaign and DLC now that I've completed it twice. It's really nice and smooth, unlike Moscow 41, which is sometimes questionable difficulty-wise. I really like that it's got only 3 persistent HQs, and that giving your full attention to each of them is such a big part of the campaign. It might actually be the most solid implementation of this approach to persistent HQs in this game, and it offers a nice contrast to the Italian prestige sinks of Desert Fox. Shortcomings-wise, I wish there was a little more action with the North Caucasus front, beating the 1st Panzer Army from the mountains and the Terek River. The campaign only has the end of that drive in Krasnodar, but this is pretty much as far as my substantial criticisms go. This is yet another part of the war solidly covered. And now let's look at the doodles. So we're gonna start today with Krasnodar, and you know, it's another one of those one-hit wonders. I mean, if you look at the way most of the enemy troops are supplied here, you'll see that it's through one railway at Krymska. And wouldn't you know, you have a few naval bombardments in your theater assets. So your task number 1 is to use one of your naval bombardments and your air support to suppress the enemy unit holding the line in the hex below Krymska. You might need to restart the mission a couple of times to get the result, but trust me, it's very possible, and once you're done, just flood all of your infantry in the area into Krymska and around it. The AI is very unlikely to be able to kick you out. Let me just stress that you shouldn't waste your 2nd naval bombardment here. It's more useful in one of the distant objectives, i.e. Novorossiysk and Taman, which are the actual challenge of this mission. And if you look at Krasnodar and Timashevsk, you realize that by turn 4, these guys will be completely suppressed and out of supply. So you shouldn't worry too much about taking these objectives as going to be easy, but what matters the most is what happens after these objectives are taken. And the more time you have at your disposal, the better. So I recommend to start pushing past Krasnodar on turn 1. That mountaineer division might look a bit scary, but with enough artillery, you'll kick it out and then push past Krasnodar and just don't stop. Try to get your best infantry at the front. The idea is to get these guys to Taman, and taking that supply hub in the middle of the map on turn 3 is pretty good timing. Another important bit to do at the beginning, try to block that Romanian division from retreating, so take those hexes at the top. I found that the AI likes retreating that Romanian division, and it can become a bit troublesome later if it's not as supply. Don't worry too much about the enemy troops at the bottom, but as they start falling apart without the supply, which means roughly around turn 3, start pushing them, even if it means taking some losses. Clearing the railway between Krynskaya and Krasnodar is vital, because you want a supply hub roughly where the German one is as soon as possible, or taking the Taman objective is going to turn into a nightmare. But once all of this stuff is done, the approach to both these objectives is roughly the same. Crowd your best infantry around these objectives, look at possible specs like engineers that have been left behind and just shift them close to the front line. I found that veteran guard divisions with engineers or ski units have been very nice at punching Novorossiysk, which should succumb relatively easily to a death of 1,000 hits. Taman, in my experience, is slightly more difficult. First and foremost, it's less accessible, but it's also the terrain makes it less easy to shuffle your infantry in and out, which means that it's the perfect spot for using your second naval bombardment. Just make sure that you don't use it too early and that you have enough infantry to follow up on the suppression it provides. Gallop is one of the drive around to take stuff missions that end this campaign, and in my experience it's easily the hardest one, and thankfully in my experience it has a very nice trick to it. The trick is that you really don't need Tatsinskaya at all. You can remove that supply hub and move all of your troops there to the west. I recommend baiting the AI there a little, leaving a weak infantry unit in the direct sight of the AI, especially right next to that little bridgehead. If you bait one of these German tank divisions into crossing the river, your life in this entire area is gonna get a whole lot easier. Trick number 2, because obviously when I say one trick, there's always two. All these ultra mega powerful units you've got around Milerovo, they go to the west. The big breakthrough in this mission is going to be across the river between Starobelsk and Voroshilovgrad. It goes without saying that having the bridging ability is vital for your HQ here, and do level it up if you get the chance. But build those pontoon bridges before the mission, push your infantry forward, and build more bridges on turn 1, and flood all of those Milerovo guys and probably some of the tanks around Starobelsk straight into the opening, followed by your guards infantry. Also, the infantry sitting next to Voroshilovgrad isn't really doing anything useful, so if you've got any surplus infantry, which you do, send them to the pontoons. And once the bridgehead is yours, use your infantry to push towards the Baltsevo. It's reasonably easy to take it way earlier than the deadline, but most importantly, as your tanks break through, send one to block the enemy supply source at Shakhte. It's critical that you do it by the end of turn 3. If you succeed, the Voroshilovgrad and Kamensk defenders will run out of supply and will pretty much get the Krasnodar scenario. Taking these objectives is not gonna cause you any trouble. So now let's look at the western section of the entire thing. Try to destroy those initial 2 German tank divisions on turn 1. They're not rear guards, so use a couple of your Katyusha-equipped units to soften them up and then kill them with your tanks. Also try to send one of your tanks past Slavyansk and towards Izum. Taking it on turn 1 obviously isn't possible, but having a tank on the other side of the river next to the city really helps with taking that objective on turn 2. And obviously devote 5 or 6 of your infantry divisions in the west to pushing towards Izum from the north. I advise against trying to kill that strong enemy infantry division standing right in your way. Just rush through its zone of control, block the railway, get as close to Izum as possible, and maybe set up a temporary supply hub in the area to feed these infantry guys. That German division will pretty easily fall later, but if you can suppress it on turn 1, why not? On turn 2, Izum shouldn't be too difficult. Kick that 4-step infantry out. Use the tank you sent there if necessary, but in any case, it's in a prime position to rush towards Pavlograd. So do that. Just remember that Pavlograd is not a take and hold objective. Once you take it, it'll disappear, so just take it and return that tank back to Slavyansk, Kramatorsk and Krasnoarmeysk, which will call for your main attention here. I recommend first destroying the enemy mechanized units sitting outside towns, but really don't wait taking Kramatorsk and Krasnoarmeysk. At first they're going to be empty, and I've also found that leaving Kramatorsk empty as you push towards the southwest is a really nice way to force that Slavyansk tank to get out of its entrenched position and retake Kramatorsk. Leaving Slavyansk empty, obviously, and making it slightly more vulnerable. Obviously, as the mission progresses, don't forget to move your infantry towards Slavyansk and Kramatorsk. They may get a little hot, and keep an eye on your supply as you advance. Get that supply hub closer to business. Debaltsevo actually gives you a truck card, so if you have a truck card to begin with, and you should, use it. And with your supply in place and the rest of the objectives in your hands, place the strongest units you can get in Kramatorsk and especially Krasnoarmeysk because it's a plains hex. Give them entrenchment and wait for the enemy reinforcements, even though it's possible to block them. This bit is up to you. Twinkle, twinkle, little star, except that this star is huge and the only twinkling is that of enemy half-tracks. Yeah, the second SS Corps is here, and your goal is going to be, naturally, to kill them as quickly as possible, because otherwise they get too annoying. As you will quickly discover in the south, the 2 mechanized units you see have rear guard, but it's actually possible to destroy the bottom one if you kill the infantry below it, and use recon and force to take those enemy stragglers blocking your approach. Just give a ski spec to one of your infantry units and you'll be able to do it. So let that mechanized infantry retreat to somewhere more convenient, encircle it, corner it, kill it. Let the other one run away and move your troops to take the bank of the river at Belgorod and Chuguyov. The forces you get in the south are pretty much sufficient to take all of the southern objectives. You might shift a couple of infantry divisions from the middle of the map too. But once you cross the river, your primary objectives will be to destroy the strong opposition, i.e. those mechanized infantry divisions. So try to be careful about where you leave your infantry, use the forests and the town hexes. Actually, Belgorod is very takeable on turn 2 without too many losses, and it's something that you actually should do because it blocks some of the enemy's supply ability. Once Chuguyov and Belgorod are securely in your hands, decide how many troops you will send north to support your other push, and how many will be devoted to clearing the remaining objectives in the south, i.e. Graveron, Kharkov, and Merefa. With the enemy mechanized infantry divisions gone, it's going to be more of a technical task. Just block their supply, use a couple of set-piece attacks, and destroy the defenders of Kharkov and Merefa, etc. In the middle and the north of the mission, you need to cover a lot more ground, so it can get a little finicky. Your immediate task, obviously, is to clear the railway lines between Stareskol and Yelets and Livni, remove all the German stragglers and defenders there, and obviously send all of your northern units west, including that tank, as quickly as possible. In the middle, you obviously need to clear Stareskol immediately, and you have plenty of forces to do so. I also recommend destroying most of the bridges between Stareskol and the original location of the Voronezh Front HQ. This will make it possible for most of your infantry in the middle section of the map to infiltrate through the enemy infantry defenders at Staria Skol and get as far west as possible on turn 1 without you worrying that the enemy motorized division there will block your railway or take your HQ or whatever. From there on, assuming everything is fine in the south, just push all of these troops towards Kursk is the most urgent objective. The enemy tank division will counterattack, but you've got plenty of infantry here, so you will be able to encircle it and smother it. But do not stop on your way to Kursk. If necessary, move your specs. Engineers, Katyushas are obviously incredibly valuable for taking cities, so hug Kursk and take it. Don't shy away from crossing the river at Kursk first and blocking that railway. This will tank pretty much the entirety of the German supply system here, and it will ultimately make it so much easier for you to clear all those stronger units around there. Finally, I've found that Obayan is not that difficult an objective. The AI tends to leave an infantry unit there, but you will inevitably have a bunch of tanks roaming about in that general area, so just send one there or two and take Obayan as well. The moment you see Dnieper, it looks incredibly daunting. You've got very powerful units around, you've got objectives all over the place, and neither the weather nor the positioning of your troops are really helping. But the reality is that Dnieper is this final exam mission. It tests whether you have done your homework, giving your HQs the abilities and the level ups, not buying too many steps and specs, and obviously perhaps not wasting too many of your valuable troops. And this is the time for you to spend all of your cards and spend all of your prestige to buy all those Katyushas and other wonderful things you haven't been buying from the shop. Because if you come prepared, this mission is far from difficult, although it is a lot of fun. Some of your immediate targets for turn 1 are pretty obvious. You really need to deal with the supply situation for Southern Front, so take that supply source and set up a supply hub already. Also, take Taganrog and the hex next to it because the AI loves attacking it, and use your best troops to the north to break through enemy lines and reach Gorlovka and if possible Stalino. The idea is to block the enemy supply north of Stalino, and if the Germans counterattack on turn 1, which they will, you've got plenty of troops and they're already starting to run out of supply. Try to break the railway line leading from Stalino towards Taganrog, but obviously also let your artillery speak and cross the Mius River north of Taganrog. I actually haven't been able to relieve that guards mechanized unit there, but oh well, just push all of the infantry through whatever breach you create and direct them towards Stalino. The deadline for the city is pretty lax, but it's deceptive. Use your infantry to kick the Stalino defenders out, and the railway line between Stalino and Zaporozhye will become open, and this is a perfect location for setting up a supply hub for your tank corps moving towards Kherson Bridge. You can actually use this route to push your mechanized and tank corps west as well, taking Mariupol and once again maybe even helping with Zaporozhye, depending on how well you do there, but that's pretty much what you need to do in the west. Now let's look in the middle on the southwest front. Here you can see we're surrounded by a bunch of really scary enemy units, and my suggestion is to first focus on using your infantry to gang up on those mechanized infantry units north of Dnipropetrovsk. Encirclement, suppressive fire, destruction. In the eastern part of the section, it's probably not going to be as easy because you don't have as much infantry, but in any case, your task here is to deal as much damage as possible, and your deadlines aren't that tight. Keep killing those mechanized units. But obviously don't shy away from sending some of your tanks to help with cutting off the Gorlovka-Stalino railway. Plus, I recommend you to either blow up or at least use your infantry to protect the bridges leading towards northern Donetsk. The enemy tanks will not hesitate to take that objective if it's empty, so use the river to your advantage. In the west, with the troops of the Voronezh front, it's not gonna be too difficult. Devote a bunch of good infantry to taking Sumy. The Germans don't have any mobile units there, so you shouldn't worry too much about counterattacks. So just get a bunch of infantry divisions around Sumy equipped with artillery and engineers, and a couple of set-piece attacks are going to do the trick. The rest of the Voronezh front units will have to deal with Kremenchug, which I found to be a profoundly easy objective. Just keep chugging along. There's hardly anything to stop you, so you should focus your best troops on once again ganging up on that mechanized infantry and destroying it as quickly as possible. Just make sure if you do it on turn 1, many of these units have counterattacks, so just suppress them, make them weak, and then attack them. Once these guys are gone, there's no one to stop you there. And once you clear that whole field out, push towards Dnipropetrovsk, it might get a little tricky. As you can see, there is a 7-step veteran unit in there, which probably will get entrenched eventually, but don't forget, this is the last mission of the campaign, so if the attack warns you about huge losses but still promises you some suppression and some kills, just go for it and just crush those defenders as your tanks move south towards Zaporozhye. Use your tanks to attack Zaporozhye head on. Your tanks will take some losses, but you will not have to waste time waiting for infantry. Zaporozhye's defenders are weak and you don't need to hold that objective. Once it's gone, push forward along the Dnieper River. This is a very good time for you to put your supply situation in order, make sure that Stalino is in your hands by that point, and set up that Stalino supply hub that I mentioned. The German supply hub near Kherson Bridge will actually be helpful in your advance, and the Kherson Bridge objective itself is not gonna be defended any better. Just a 3-step security unit, no match at all. To victory! And this is it for Don 42, the 7th expansion for Unity of Command 2, which kind of leaves me wondering about what's coming next. I mean, Moscow 41, Don 42, could there be a pattern? Anyway, thanks for listening and watching. I hope my tips have been useful, and I guess until reasonably soon, cheers!